listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI from their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed price contract, with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the testing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Working for a CRO vendor, it's not very often you get the opportunity to chat with somebody who's worked for not just one of your competitors, but two. But that's exactly what I'm about to do today. Tim Stewart spent a total of 7.5 years working for Maximizer and SiteSpect, and for the last 8 years has been in charge of his own destiny as founder of website optimization and analytics company TRS Digital. Tim, you've been an advisor to organisations of all sizes for many years, and from what I can see, you've been more than fully employed during that time. What is about your approach and also what methodology you use that keeps attracting new business?
I mean, obviously, probably best talking to the clients, as they'd have a better understanding of kind of like what made them select me, if that's kind of the core to the question. But I think the fundamentals for organisations, larger organisations, are not dissimilar to small, medium, is that they've got a problem and they need a solution. And same as most of our users on the websites. And so I think the main distinction I've had, the main advantage I've had in terms of positive word of mouth and getting referrals and getting more business has been that I generally have found that solution. And that solution has been profitable, and that solution has therefore led to the next challenge, because quite often once you've fixed one problem, you basically get elevated up to the next one. So I don't think there's any great secret to what I'm doing or if I'm doing anything differently. I think the fundamentals of what we all try to do is common to my business. I think I have, either through kind of experience or maybe a little bit of luck, managed to have some good results. And once you've got a few good results behind you, it tends to turn into further work.
And in our original discussions, you mentioned something about a mentoring program that helps you get additional work along the way.
I've been doing a lot of work as a solo consultant for the last 8 years, and there's a limit to how much capacity I've got. Just straight up, there's only so many hours I can sell, there's only so much work I can do at a quality that I'm happy with. And I have subcontracted or worked with partnership agencies to either backfill on skills or backfill on capacity to try and get what is needed to fix the problem sorted. And I repeatedly found that I was struggling to find reliable pairs of hands to help out. And so about 3-4 years ago, I decided to start taking people up on the offer to mentor them or talk them through issues that they've got with their challenges, their projects, and an unofficial capacity really. But by helping those companies and businesses and people come up, solve their immediate problems, talk to them about the process, and kind of upskill them in some of the stuff that I've had experience with, it's had a kind of a twofold effect. One, it and kind of main motivation, it feels good. You know, you learn through teaching, so it's been instructive in me understanding kind of what I can do in the business. But the second part, and it's kind of more a side effect than a conscious plan, is that by, if you want, seeding the market with people who understand that I can solve problems, when those people, either their company has grown to a certain size or their customer has grown to a certain size, or they get a full-time job and join a company, I'm front of mind when it comes to hiring extra support. So it's a kind of a longer burn approach, because some of these can take 2-3 years to pay off. But I have found that I get referrals from people who have been taught, and this is the mentoring part, to recognize when they are out of their depth, but have also been taught that finding a solution doesn't mean if you aren't the solution, you just stop. You still find a solution, you just look elsewhere for it. And in a number of cases, they've pointed to me and gone, I can't deal with this by myself, but I know someone who can. And in most of those cases, we've ended up working on the project together. So effectively, those people who came to me with their problem clients, and I helped them solve that, when they have got their client stable and growing, the client then reaches a maturity level which is beyond the skills they've achieved to date. I never mentored them on that stuff because it was never something they'd reached. Now they reach that point, they realize I need more support, and it becomes another teaching opportunity. And that therefore ends up getting me paid for some of this stuff, even though the initial engagement, that client was uh, not at a maturity level where they would appreciate the extra cost, but also some of the stuff that we'd be able to do. They hadn't done their foundational stuff. So that's been quite a good symbiotic relationship for me in terms of kind of new business development as well over the last 3-4 years.
I'm sure that delivers a great deal of satisfaction to you, because it's a bit like a parent who wants their children to inherit certain traits. Is that the case?
Yeah, very much so. It's a core motivation, and it's one of those things where, when I see somebody who came to me 3-4 years ago going, how do I do, paraphrase, how do I do ABC, and I help them with the ABCs of A/B testing, and then 3-4 years later they're running an agency, and from what I can see, like I said, sometimes I get involved with their clients, doing a good job of it. That's hugely satisfying, and I think also to a degree helps give back to the market. If we've got a better baseline for what an acceptable level of skill is, then it's a lot harder for kind of the snake oil salespeople to come in and say, we promise you that but cheaper. It's kind of a minimum standard needs to be reached, and there's a degree of authority in what we do anyway. It's very accountable, so it's maybe less exposed to that than other sectors of the digital space, but it does mean that if there is a association with quality and association with doing the job properly, with the kind of conversion rate optimization discipline, that I think is a tide that raises all boats. It means that we all have to meet a certain standard, but then a client base can come to expect that. And what we've all said and has proved out time and time again over the years is it's not a short-term fix. It's not I did CRO that summer 3 years ago and that's me done for CRO. I don't need to again. It's the adoption over time of an experimentation and optimization mentality, and we hear the word thrown around, a culture within a business that means that it becomes second nature. And because for a lot of businesses that sort of shift in the way of thinking and indeed shift in the way they're structured is not natural or easy, it needs somebody to help with onboarding that. And if we've got a market full of independents and vendors and agencies who are not just thinking for themselves, but are thinking that I will leave this client in a better state so that whoever takes over afterwards is working on top of the foundations I built, rather than kind of chopping and changing and being a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Piecemeal about how they approach their optimization program, then we've got clients who have better success. And if we've got clients who have better success, generally they can spend more money on it. So it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a self-reinforcing positive loop. And if I'm just a small part of that by kind of finding people who've got potential and guiding them with no, when I say mentoring, I'm not charging people for this. It's no kind of financial benefit directly from that. But I think we all end up benefiting from it because we all know that there's a certain standard out there.
And these people that come in to be mentored, do they come with different levels of knowledge? Are you looking for a specific type, or is it just you kind of mold with whatever you've been given?
A little of the second, to be fair. I'm not consciously going out and targeting specific areas. It tends to be I get more people come to me on the marketing side rather than product side, and it tends to be I will get people who will come from the kind of the consultant or the analyst side than the developer or the design side.
What about data specialists? Because I know that data or business intelligence is really important to your business.
Yeah, that's probably the area where I probably could do with more mentoring than being the mentor. Okay. It's business intelligence is a well-established business sector. The interesting part is it's heavily kind of hooked into kind of financials, accounting, and to a degree sort of stock and logistics. And there are some very talented people who do work with that sort of stuff. But to me, the parallel to kind of what we do with growing a market and optimizing our market share and matching proposition fit to availability, it's the same stuff as they talk about. It's just they don't seem to point their lens at marketing or digital data, and we don't seem to apply kind of existing known processes which are well established, got different languages and tools out there, because we don't see it as being in our area of expertise. It's not important because that's not what web people do. That's a finance and accounts thing. So I have found a group of people, like I said, I tend to get more analysts talk to me on the mentoree side of things, where it's people come in and say, how did you know to test that?
Right.
And then I talk to them and say, well, I looked at how the business makes money, and then I looked at how it gets the people to make the money. And then by the time I've explained kind of like the process, they turn around and go, I'm missing something here. I didn't think about how they make money. I just looked at how they get web traffic. And that seems to be the shift that's happening across the market. It's not just me. Is that once you reach a certain point of maturity, you realize that the just testing, I know it's the kind of the stereotype, just testing button colors or headlines is not actually going to move the needle for the business. It may move the needle on web metrics, and some of those web metrics may indeed move the needle on sales, and top line sales through the website improving will have some influence on the business metrics, money in the bank. But that's not always a completely linear path. There's a degree of attrition each step of that, and ultimately there are inefficiencies throughout that chain which are nothing to do with the web metrics. We talk often about marketing and I will help the conversion rate on this site, and then we'll complain about the quality of traffic that comes through.
Mm-hmm.
But the two are part of the same picture. If you've got good traffic and poor converting website, you don't earn the most from the traffic that you've done, even though it's a good job of getting traffic. And if you've got the most optimized site in the world, but it's optimized against an audience that's different to what you can attract with your marketing, you've reached another local maxima. That's as good as you can convert for the audience you've got. Well, actually, those two pieces really should be talking as one, much the same as product and proposition, and indeed fulfillment and delivery, after sales and lifetime value work. That's when you start to look again and go, the companies that have done well with this have got an optimization culture, not because they've got a good team on their website, but because the entire business looks to optimize. HR are checking how they hire people. Accounts are making sure that they are turning around their invoices and billables within the optimal amount of time to ensure profit and money in bank at the time. And that could we do better mentality is what ends up being pervasive. And that's, I think, where business intelligence and data has got a strength that could help web optimizers, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the money in the bank factor is what we're all aiming for. But knowing how that joins to everything else requires some deeper analysis of the business as a whole rather than the website. And that's not something that's, I would say, taught in schools, but this discipline is new for that. But that's not something that's generally covered, that holistic approach and looking at the numbers and going, we could improve our conversion rate, but actually there's more money to be made by improving our profit margin by changing this supplier. It's still optimization to me, but it doesn't fall within the A/B testing remit of what most people consider the CRO discipline.
So that leads me on to a very neatly to another question, actually, which is, you've mentioned that it's more about the data, and obviously as CRO suppliers and agencies look at the data a lot. But where do you think the future of CRO, that's conversion rate optimization, is in this bigger picture, where you see that it's businesses being optimized, not just the testing?
I'd say the same thing about CRO as I would say about the data. I wouldn't say the data is the be all and end all. The data is a tool to help you understand. just the same as any qualitative stuff in terms of user research, market research. Understanding the proposition fit is one of the tools within that. So I think we're already seeing the market understand this better, in that the conversion optimization piece of that is a powerful tool. And given that we can run experiments at much lower costs than it would cost to do if the equivalent of in, say, production, it's still going to be advantageous. But I think the discipline of CRO as it has become known, which strictly speaking appears to be kind of limited to kind of AB, MVT on websites, is, depending which way around you want to look at it, it's either going to disappear into the whole business, and experimentation as a mentality, optimization as a mentality will become embedded across the whole business, or each business ends up with their equivalent to CRO, but it may not be conversion rate they're optimizing. It may be job retention optimization for HR, to put an example out of the hat. So I think the big kind of the overarching piece is the businesses that are successful doing this have been looking at it from a different way. Rather than looking at a calculated metric like conversion rate, they've been looking at kind of the customer satisfaction levels. It's customer value optimization, and that's got two aspects to it. There is the value of what you do for your customer to the customer, but then there is the value you extract from a customer during their lifetime. And that value is not represented by how many clicks they did on their first visit, nor how much profit you made on that first purchase. It's down to how many times was I the right answer to that customer's need.
And do you think things like AI is going to help in that kind of decision-making process?
Yeah, I think it already is. This is kind of the general appeal, is for this sort of stuff to be more joined together. We're already seeing the popularization of data science departments within businesses. Famously, we've got things like Tesco's club cards and loyalty cards, which allow them to look at buying patterns and kind of headline up when weather is this, then ice cream sales will be that. And those are all kind of fairly simple to understand kind of examples, and everybody kind of looks at those and goes, "Oh, logical." But what AI and machine learning do is they basically take the inputs you give them, and they don't necessarily come in with the preconceptions. So they will spot patterns that the humans involved would not necessarily have spotted. We can look at something, a big pattern of data, and go, that's odd. But with machine learning, it tends to go, is it odd enough? And it will look at it against the great scheme of things, and if it stands out from the predicted path far enough, it raises a flag. Now, what happens to that flag still at the moment remains a human interaction, although the AI side of things then kicks in to go, here's a set of instructions which you can follow should you find an interesting flag. But I think, if anything, if we're talking about CRO becoming O across the business, across all parts of the business, experimentation mentality becoming a culture across the business, we have a finite number of people and hours in a day, and we have other things to do which are not just optimization, just doing the job. So I think the scaling of doing this, the opportunity cost, or the opportunity missed opportunity, the opportunity regret from not taking every opportunity to optimize, is where AI and ML sit in the meantime. If we're talking about the classic example of here's a jar and there's a jar full of stones, if the humans are the stones and you can cram as many stones into that jar as possible, you still have capacity within that. So you can pour in some water, you filled up more of the gaps. You can pour in some sand, and it'll displace some water, but you'll fill up more of the gaps. You can still make a better net use of the area you've got, but it won't work with any one of those independently. There will be gaps, or there will be inefficiencies if you have AI or ML without instructions or interpretation, and there will be chances to optimize that you missed because of time or lack of clarity or inability to compare very large scale sets of data, which the human beings do well once they aggregate and see patterns. But the ML side of things says make your own pattern, compare against. So I think its fit is going to be still human guided, but right now it fills the gap on opportunity regret, and that's the best use of it for short to medium term. I think as things get cleverer, all bets are off. It could be we need the humans even less; they'll come up with better ideas than us. But at this stage, I think it's wise to keep control. And certainly, most of the people you see talking about AI cover half their talk on when AI went wrong. And so there's still those cautionary notes, and that doesn't mean that it can't work. It just means we haven't learned to use that tool properly yet.
So, staying a little bit on kind of technology as opposed to the human interaction, when you kind of talking about business optimization as opposed to CRO, why would you think that server-side testing in the kind of CRO world, and I won't say it's just purely CRO, has started to become more prevalent?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, two main drivers. The first is kind of what you're alluding to there, is that the cosmetic impact of changes, the behavioral impact you get from changing stuff that is visible to the customer, depends on a couple of factors. One is what you're doing, and the other is what the customer was going to do originally. We talk about making behavioral changes, measuring behavioral changes. We have, if we've got a business that has multiple touch points, or we've got big data besides the scene to understand what those patterns look like, some intelligence on what that user behavior would have been without interference. So server side makes it easier. I'm not saying it's impossible client side. Makes it easier for you to integrate some of those business questions, some of those other sources of data, some of that prior knowledge into your hypotheses. It allows you to test things which are reliant upon outside sources of data and, depending on the system, can be adapted according to that. So if client one on page one of test does X behavior, put them into the next pot of learning, which is they are now in the eligible group for a hypothesis further down the line. So we get into that adaptive piece, which is again where AI and ML could be useful. So that ability to ask business questions rather than website questions, I think, is the main driver for most of the companies I've seen who've gone server side. They simply hit the limits of what client side could do in a reasonable return time, and server side allows you to release test more easily, soak test against test servers. It allows you to feature flag. It allows you to change algorithms and return results that are different to what have been returned and were pre-programmed into the website. So it allows the dev cycle to be accelerated, not just the marketing cycle. And I think that's the core driver for most of them. The other factor is kind of the privacy angle. Is where we have an existing relationship and where we have the right to use that, and people have opted in to have their experience optimized. The customers rightly expect their experience to be optimized. So if I go to a grocer and I've previously exhibited buying behaviors that say I like this particular brand, the website is better for me. My experience is better if my particular brand is more easily available, or if there is a choice by the retailers to do some price promotions and I fall into a particular group that they're trying to incentivize, they could either price promote something I don't want, or they could do a price promotion on the stuff that I was going to buy. And that's a business choice. How would I want to? But that's also a consumer benefit. Now, the dark side to that is they could manipulate you to buy stuff that you don't want, but you make more profit on. And the side that gets the most publicity is people have to be okay with understanding that that's happening and have the option to opt out if they don't want to. And server side gives you not a way to opt out of that, but a way to control that more closely. If you're reliant upon cookies, if you are reliant upon things other than customers uniquely identifying themselves voluntarily, then some of that stuff requires you to use more, should we say, privacy questionable techniques. And that has an impact on accuracy, which in testing terms is terrible because we can't ensure independence. But it also has an impact, I would say, that's worse, which is consistency for the customer. If somebody's being treated differently because of action A and action B, they need to know about it and have the choice to opt out. And we need to make sure that change is fair to them. And I think server side gives you more control over that stuff, as long as, same as AI and ML, the person doing that control is doing so with the customer's benefit in mind, with the understanding that happier customers spend more money more times.
That's very interesting, because I would think that the market is consistently moving. It's moving in a direction with greater technology. So I mentioned AI and server side, the prevalence of server side. So in that kind of market that's moving, where do you see the opportunity for CRO companies, and what do you think are the challenges that they face today?
I'll take the challenges first, because I think that then leads on to the opportunities.
Okay.
So I think the challenge right now is, and it's not just CRO, I would say it's sort of any software product or SaaS product. There is no immediate benefit. Okay, the sales pitch has to be what I was talking about at the start. When you've optimized everything, you've got a better understanding of the levers you can pull for customer value over a lifetime, and it gives you huge amounts of intelligence to shape your product and your team and your approach, which has business efficiencies as well as revenue efficiencies. So that's a great sales pitch. That's why conversion rate optimization has become kind of core to a lot of big businesses. But the truth is that doesn't happen day one when you turn it on. In fact, the truth is that that level can happen after many years of testing, many failed experiments that have shown you where good lies. And
But companies are looking for that kind of instant gratification almost, aren't they?
they all want the quick win. And the
Yes.
problem is the quick win is what's promised, but it's not necessarily there. So the problem for vendors, CRO companies, but also generally SaaS companies, is that they have to sell on the basis that here's the kind of the shiny castle on the hill. Here's what you'll get at your ultimate goal, because that's what people are motivated by. That's what they're buying for. But they then have to come in with kind of the bad news, good news, bad news pairing of, by the way, you're still going to have to work at this. And that's, I think, a little bit where it falls down. And I don't think necessarily it's the fault of the vendors when they do that, but that kind of trough of disillusionment is real, and people do tend to react poorly. And the sum result of that frequently is, and sadly I'm afraid, is that people blame the tool, not their approach to testing, and therefore they change the vendor. So the biggest problem is you've got a very short window of period to prove yourself, but the time it could take to show real value could be 3x, 4x that in terms of time. So if you've got a 12-month contract and you've got them off the market for 12 months, if they work well in 12 months, they'll see enough signs to continue and go forward. But that if they work well part is not the fault of the vendor. It's down to the company. And if they work poorly, if somebody goes off on maternity leave, if there is a change in staffing, if the market shifts underneath them and priorities change, they may well be paying for a vendor for that period, but they haven't used it properly. And then the vendor takes the blame. Well, we tried this and it didn't work, so we're going to go with company B because they promised us fast wins and low-hanging fruit. And
Yes.
and whilst that is frustrating, the bigger shame is that they will do the same thing again with vendor B. And a year later, they'll be back on the market going, well, vendor B didn't work, let's try vendor C. And after a while, having done 5-6 years, not only have they sort of poisoned themselves on the very approach, because they've never truly got out of year one. We've been testing for 5 years and seen no results. No, you've tested year one badly 5 times.
Okay.
And that's the biggest problem for the vendors. So the opportunity, I guess, is kind of show them. Do what I was talking about for the mentoring. That's where, if you can package your product, and it doesn't have to be with a client services, if you can package it with if you follow these instructions, I'll check on how you're using it, you will do better than somebody who doesn't. And I hesitate to use gamification because that tends to be an extrinsic motivation, which tends not to stick as well.
Yep.
But you see this in other SaaS products. You see Salesforce have got Trailhead, which is their sort of inbuilt training program. and that's free for anybody to use, even if they're not on Salesforce. But obviously, it's better if you can do it on your own stuff. You see companies like HubSpot, who basically sell a marketing and nudge system to nudge your customers, but they nudge you to use their system more. You've got platforms like Intercom, Mixpanel, which report for SaaS companies on the health of their client base, trying to predict churn, but they're looking for key indicators like they don't log in often. When they do log in, they don't spend long. Or here's 3 features which are commonly used by our successful, many times renewing customers, which these guys have never touched. That would wave a red flag saying high chance of churn because the best features we've got for somebody in month 3 of a contract haven't been opened. We should get in there. So the opportunity there is to, I think, for the vendors, I think, to mostly to think about it as if it's going to be a multi-year relationship, even if you've only got 1 year. And it sounds brave / commercially suicide, but actually it's the same as I was saying about you're planting seeds. Not everybody will. Some will come in, take advantage, and leave.
Yeah. The other aspect, I think, is that we believe that CRO is strategic and our methodologies are aligned to that. But many of our potential clients see it as tactical. Firstly, would you say that's a reasonable assumption? And if it is, could you share your experience as to what could be done to change the perception of those potential clients?
It's an accurate observation in terms of how people are looking at things. It comes down to one of those challenges. This comes back to that education piece I was just talking about. People seem to get confused between strategy and tactics, like they're 2 separate beasts, and they're not. The strategy is kind of where you're going and the general direction. We want to be on that hill, and between here and there is a straight line. Tactics are the steps you take to execute on your strategy. So it could be you take your first step towards that hill and there's a wall. So tactic 1 is walk around the wall or go over the wall. Now it feels like it's short term, it's not in line with the strategy, but as long as it's still moving forward in the direction the strategy dictates, it's actually a strategic move. It's just the current tactic for what you're faced with at the time. So your example actually gives a great example of how your strategy is longer term engagement with the customer. Your tactic is find them quick wins because you're getting credit. That's still a strategic test. It's just not strategic for their business. It's strategic for your business. And you could argue convincing people internally other than the people who engaged you also has a strategic hold. But that's where I think a lot of people fall down, is because they have repeatedly engaged with a new platform every 12 months because it wasn't our fault, it was the platform, but these guys promised to be different. They're starting at the wall each time, and they're judging people on how well they jump that first wall. Wow, these guys built a ladder, these guys built steps, these guys bashed their way through. Not getting kind of obsessed with kind of how well step 1 went, rather than going, did anybody question why there's a wall there in the first place? And that's kind of that stepping outside the picture piece is kind of the joy of being a consultant, is I get to come in and tell people they're stupid because I'm outside their fishbowl. They're not stupid. They're working with the information they've got to their hands. They're making the logical decision. But it's that mix of strategic and tactical changes. Sometimes you've got the best roadmap in the world. Sometimes you've got the test that will save the business. Everything's there. You've got it working, and and ultimately when you run that test, it was everything you thought it would be. But to prove that test needs to happen, to justify the costs, to yourself quantify the risks that you've backed the right horse to spend the next 6 months of your testing program going down this particular rabbit hole, you may want to do 2 quick and dirty tactical tests, which are tactically not as statistically rigorous as you might do. You want to get an idea and direction. They may not be statistically pure. You've accepted there's some sample pollution. You've accepted that you've had to make some compromises. You've accepted that you're not going to completely rebuild a new feature for the first test, but you're going to do a smoke door test, a smoke test, or a fake door test to establish whether people are interested at all before you start down that process. That's a tactical test, but it's no revenue at the end of that. It only suits the later testing program. It's a risk checking test. So I think people use tactical tests as a misnomer for kind of short-term revenue focused, because for most companies, if you can show a monetary win, that will get you more buy-in for later on. But actually, can we even do this test is still tactical, and it's never called tactical, it's always called strategic. So I think it's a blurring of semantics, is that tactical has been used to mean money now, but the education piece means you need to explain that money now may be at the expense of more money later, or it may be that you stay in this slow growth window for longer. And SaaS companies talk about runway. You stay in your kind of slower velocity period for longer, which, although it's a lower risk, it limits your maxima because you're only going to go as much as you've invested in it. Because you've held back on investment, you're not going so much. And in that 6-month period, 12-month period, 3-year period that you didn't get traction, somebody else did. So whilst you got small win, small win, small win, frustrated it didn't go bigger, somebody else was going small win, add to small win, add to small win, add to small win, 1 step back, learn from that, add 2 steps forward. And in relative terms versus the competition, in relative risk of losing opportunity, your opportunity regret in the market, you've stepped backwards by 6 months. And if it's a fast moving market space, if it's competitive, if there's a narrowing window of opportunity before it commoditizes, that could, in 3 years' time, prove fatal to your company. But because people are very good at looking at that wall in front of them, they go, give me the money now. And that's an education piece. And it may not be something that a external vendor, CRO or otherwise can solve, because that's endemic within the business. It's endemic within the people they hire are reacting based on how that business is structured. And there are certain companies that will continue to do that until the war chest is eroded, or until they're outpaced by a faster competitor that is more agile and more experiment minded. And we're already seeing that in certain sectors. We've seen that in the online travel agent space. We've seen this insurance space. When I was growing up, you had to go to a shop to buy insurance. It was underwritten by 1 or 2 insurance companies through 1 or 2 people, insurance brokers in your local town. All the paperwork was done by hand, and certain things were just uninsurable. Compare that now to the massively multi-country, multi-platform, multi-device, everything insurance market. They're interim people, they're middlemen, the affiliate market, and the fact that everything is done over phone and online and at scale, and because they've got your car and your house and your phone and your travel insurance, they probably hold a bigger set of data among the most companies, apart from maybe Google, Apple, and Facebook.
So, Tim, that discussion I would love to be able to take further on, because there's a whole new other area which I would call the disruptive technologies and things like that, which we kind of touched on. But we're running out of time. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's been a really interesting podcast. I'd love to pick you up again, maybe in a few weeks' time, to see if we can extend this a little bit longer.
Sure.
But Tim, thank you very much. It's been great, and thanks for sparing the time for me.
No worries. Thank you for having me.